A good Erev Shabbos, Parshat Devarim, and Erev Tisha B'av. Today we're going to be speaking about how to keep perspective even in face of uncomfortable situations in a work environment. So really where this conversation starts is a few parshas ago, when we're told about the story of the Jewish people complaining after Aaron HaKohen dies. And we find this very fascinating lashon, where they were told in Parshat Devarim, where they complain to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, why did you take us out of Mitzrayim to kill us here in the Midbar? And the only food that we have, ein lechem ve'ein mayim v'nafshenu katza me'alechem me'alechem 𝗟𝗘𝗧, that we're totally dried up and we're totally fed up of this horrible food. Now, what food were they eating? The food that they were complaining against was the man. Now, we're familiar with the complaints against the man that we have previously, early on in the Torah. But this time around, there's a fascinating 𝗧𝗛𝗧 𝗦𝗦 that says, the truth is that the Jews, on some level, were right. Their complaint against the man at this point had 𝗦𝗧 to it. There was something which was truthful, and what was that about? What that was about is that right now, here in Parshat Devarim, we're speaking about the Jewish people that are going to go into Eretz Yisrael. This was a different generation. And while the man miraculously was able to give sustenance and being able to provide all of nutrition for that generation that went out of Mitzrayim, and therefore it gave them what they needed, the man was not giving the people at this stage in Jewish history what they needed. That experience that they were having of the man was legitimate, because they were people that were destined to go into Eretz Yisrael and they weren't going to have the man. So if that's the case, what did the Jewish people do wrong? So the 𝗧𝗛𝗧 𝗦𝗦 says that what went wrong was that they made a story about it. Is that they turned this experience of uncomfortability, which was really truthful, and started to complain and say, really, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he doesn't really care about us, and Moshe Rabbeinu, you just basically took us here in the Midbar to kill us. And they turned everything in a negative perspective. So too, when it comes to our own work experiences, sometimes, and I know I've had this myself, and having conversations with people all the time, and this is what's happening to them, is that one day, they just start to look at their job, and they just start to feel like just not doing it anymore. You start to feel empty, start to feel like you're not utilizing your strengths, you start to feel bored, start to feel frustrated, Suddenly your bosses are bothering you, sometimes you just can't handle these people that you're working with anymore, and it's uncomfortable. It's a real uncomfortable situation. And it doesn't just happen one day, it continues a day, a week, a month. And the question is, how do we respond? How do we react to that situation? And what was amazing when I saw the 𝗧𝗛𝗧 𝗦𝗦 is that what we're seeing over here is that sometimes we experience an internal shift. We become different people, that now we need to move on to something else. The same job that you may have had that you felt okay with, or even you loved for many years, one day may start not giving you the nutrition. It may not give you the experience. It may not be providing the money that you need. Your financial situation that you've managed on for X amount of time, it becomes uncomfortable. And that's giving a signal to you that it's time for you to move on to something else. The question is that how do we react in the situations? Do we react in the situations by developing a negative attitude? By thinking, why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing this to me? Why is Hashem putting me in this situation? And start complaining, which is what happened over there in Parshat Devarim, and therefore they were sent to snakes as a punishment. Or are you able to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to communicate something to me? Why is this connected to Tisha B'av? Because as we know that the first Tisha B'av, the source of Tisha B'av comes from the 𝗟𝗘𝗧'𝗦𝗦, the 𝗟𝗘𝗧. And we're told in this week's parsha, it would be hard to believe it. It would be hard to believe it unless we saw the words. That Moshe Rabbeinu gives us insight that we didn't see in Parshat Shalach. And he says, in the pasuk Chav Zayin, Perak Aleph, 𝗖𝗛𝗔𝗡𝗡𝗘 v'alechem, and you just complained in your tents, and you said, B'sinas Hashem oisanu, 𝗧𝗛𝗧 ma'eretz Mitzrayim l'seisasanu b'yad ha'emori lashmidenu. Could you imagine? They said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Hashem hated us, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates us, so He took us out of Mitzrayim to bring us to this place so He can kill us. Could you imagine that Bnei Yisrael could say such a lashon because HaKadosh Baruch Hu hated us? He had bad intentions. The whole thing was just a ploy to kill us. That's the straw that broke, we can say, the camel's back. When Bnei Yisrael fell into the story of saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates us, and everything's bad, and there's bad intentions, and they cried, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, Chevra, now I see. You don't have the makeup. You don't have what's needed to be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. You can't go into Eretz Yisrael. You're too stuck. You're too stuck in your Mitzrayim story. You're too stuck in your slavery mentality. You're too stuck in your negative cycle of thinking. And therefore the tikkun of Tisha B'av, is that yes, we've had challenging times. We are in challenging times. Globally, as a nation, each one in our own lives. Right? And when we experience within our own jobs challenging times and uncomfortable times, we have a choice. We have a choice to say, is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, chas v'shalom, is out to get me? HaKadosh Baruch Hu has something negative in mind? Or is it that through this challenge, through this feeling of uncomfortability that we're in, we recognize that in some way HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to communicate something to us, which is, 𝗟𝗘𝗧𝗦𝗧, I love you very much. It's time to move on to something better. It's time to move on to a higher paying job. It's time to move on to a job which uses your strengths better. It's time for you as a nation to upgrade your existence. Galus, you may feel comfortable in Galus, but Chevra, this is not what it's meant to be. I'm trying to communicate to you because I love you that there's something better on the other side. And when we do that and we look at HaKadosh Baruch Hu with eyes of positivity and recognize His Ava for us, but Ava is because Hashem loved us, that is why He gives us our uncomfortable moments. Have a good Shabbos and a meaningful fast.